All right, prepare a new quad chart for this lesson, Search and Destroy. And our essential question is, what factors contributed to American escalation of the conflict in Vietnam? We're really going to look at moving forward in Vietnam as President Johnson starts to pour more troops into South Vietnam to combat the spread of communism and the spread of both the Viet Minh and the Viet Cong who are fighting there, and kind of the lasting results of that as it progresses. And this quote, I think, is significant to Westmoreland and a lot of conventional commanders' arrogance and just how they thought they were doing in Vietnam against a guerrilla enemy, an insurgent fighter who was going to stand the test of time and continue to fight. So militarily, we succeeded in Vietnam. We won every engagement we're involved in. And, statistically, that's true. We beat the North Vietnamese army. We beat the Viet Cong every time we met them on the battlefield, or we met them in a chance contact. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't result in anything. We had to win the Battle of Time, which is something that they did, and we couldn't do very well at all. The Gulf of Tonkin is really what establishes American presence in Vietnam and gives us the decision point to commit forces into Vietnam. So what happens is a couple of U.S. ships, one's USS Maddox, is inside of North Vietnamese territorial waters. We claim that we were in international waters, but we actually went north of that boundary of the DMZ into what would have been patrolled by the North Vietnamese. And a day before this initial attack happens on August 2nd. A day before this, CIA-supported gunboats had went up the river into North Vietnam and conducted attacks that resulted in these North Vietnamese gunboats coming out, torpedo boats coming out into the Gulf of Tonkin in order to defend their territory. The USS Maddox was there. These torpedo boats were patrolling behind them. The commander from the Maddox fires a shot across the bow, kind of a warning shot to these torpedo boats. They in turn respond with firing machine gun fire and torpedoes at them, at which time the Maddox destroys the boats and proceeds south of the DMZ. They report this back to the president, and he's like, he doesn't want to do anything. A couple of days later, they're a little bit further south this time, and another reported incident. Bad weather. There's thunderstorms going on, lightning, really, really bad seas. It's dark. It's in the middle of the night. And they claim that they're being attacked again. They fire a lot of rounds. They launch aircraft from a nearby aircraft carrier that goes out there and supposedly destroys these boats again. The message gets back to the president that they are, again, being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. And then he decides at that point in time, hey, this is an act of war. We've got to do something. But the commander of the Maddox changed his tune. Later, he says, no, we made a mistake. We never could confirm any boats out there. And years later, Admiral Stockdale, who famous prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton, wins the Medal of Honor, but he flew missions that night. And in his book, he wrote, I didn't see any boats out on the sea. So, and they reported this to the president. But at this point in time, the president doesn't change his tune. And he decides to go to Congress and ask for a resolution to allow him to do things in Vietnam that hadn't been done, commit forces to Vietnam, and start the bombing of North Vietnam. And this is called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Basically provides the President of the United States a blank check for all future operations, both ground forces and air campaigns against the Republic of or North Vietnamese, and to commit troops into the Republic of Vietnam in the South. There's President Johnson. A lot of people say he abused that power and ultimately later results in taking power away from the president. But the first major operation that he authorizes is Operation Rolling Thunder, which is an air operation to destroy all infrastructure in the north. He wants to do this to boost the South Vietnamese morale, the people that were there to support, to show that we're there to help them defeat communism. And it stopped the flow of insurgents and Viet Cong into South Vietnam to cause damage and sabotage against their targets. Ultimately, this failed. Thousands and thousands of tons of bombs dropped on North Vietnamese targets. Very inefficient. Targeting wasn't very good because the president of the United States was controlling the targeting from the White House. Never a good idea. He was so worried about having collateral damage and civilian casualties at this point in time that he was hitting targets that were insignificant, and it ultimately, as a campaign, it failed. Another thing that really plays into this for the North Vietnamese is they had over 5,000 air defense weapons, and you can see some of those weapons represented here, and they were devastating against U.S. targets. Those 5,000 guns resulted in 983 U.S. aircraft being shot down during Operation Rolling Thunder. Another thing that really inhibits us in Vietnam, at least historically, to look back at it, is the Secretary of Defense, McNamara, was really worried, emphasizing a quantitative or a numbers-driven war. McNamara had been the president of Ford Motor Corporation, so he understood production models. He understood throughput in an industry. But I always ask this question: does being successful in a business make you successful at managing a war? And in this case, I think that we were very, very off base. So we start to determine if we're winning the war based on how many people we're killing, not based on taking terrain, winning the hearts and minds of the people, and changing an ideology. Something that we've tried to learn over the last years since Vietnam, but I think it's something that we struggle with and continue to struggle with in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq when we fight insurgents today. It also results in increased increased presence. At this point in time, we had advisors on the ground, but for the first time, we start to commit actual ground forces initially to protect an air base there at Da Nang and keep the ability to flow supplies and additional forces into Vietnam. And the president's guidance on this is this war must be limited. Well, where have we heard this before? This sounds a lot like the Truman policy in Korea. He doesn't want to incite other communist forces to come and fight in Vietnam. It's understandable from a policy perspective, but you guys all know that from an objective of total war and winning, it's not one that can be maintained. So the first real engagement that U.S. forces have in Vietnam is the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley, where we take one battalion of the 7th Cavalry and we put them out with a lot of support. And we realize afterward that they're surrounded by two North Vietnamese regular army divisions. And they maintain this gunfight for an incredible amount of time until they're very short on ammunition. They're taking massive casualties. But we're able to do that because of the superior air support that the United States brought into this fight. And it forces the North Vietnamese back into the jungle and into hiding, and they can't even defeat this one battalion. So it shows that I think we can be really successful if we apply our force at the right time. Operation White Wing is the massive operation that we start to do search and destroy missions. As these units retreat back into the jungle, we're going out and looking for them. And today we call those movement to contact. So the infantry would be out in the actual the enemy territory in the jungle, walking until they find them. When they find them, they try to fix. Remember that tactical term, fix. Keep them from moving and bring in heavier forces to destroy them. And again, we're starting to measure our victory in this war by body counts versus how many casualties we're taking. And this chart just shows the escalation in forces at the high point up in 1968 to almost 500,000 troops deployed into Vietnam. Continuing with escalation, the North is doing the same thing. They are pouring forces in, primarily Viet Cong insurgent fighters into the South along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is a primitive trail network that's actually located outside of Vietnam. It's in Laos and Cambodia, and at some points in time in the war, we're not interdicting there at all. And at some points, we are trying to bomb and interdict this. But you can see here, it's a primitive network. You bomb a dirt trail with fighters that are just moving supplies by primitive means. They simply move the trail. So whatever assets we put into this were very ineffective, and they continued swarming really from the north and down into the south. The next major innovation, I think, for U.S. forces is to establish these big fire bases out in the middle of enemy territory, both in the south and in the north, where the North Vietnamese are operating. But we have these big fire bases that come equipped with artillery batteries of 105 or 155 millimeter howitzers, engineers to push the jungle back. So you have, great big fields of fire. We're supporting South Vietnamese forces on these bases. And we're using these bases as a launching point for search and destroy operations. And obviously the howitzers are supporting those missions as well. We continue to inflict massive casualties on the North Vietnamese army and the Viet Cong forces. But again, they're playing the test of time against this. They begin to realize they can't win this war of numbers, and they pull back and they start to fight a war of attrition, classic guerrilla warfare. We're going to avoid open combat as long as we can until we have an advantage. We're going to use communist agents and sympathizers in the South to help us both in basing solutions, in support, in food, in hiding the fighters, and continue to maintain our basing solutions and safe havens in Laos and Cambodia, where for the most part, the United States is not going into. And we are small groups that did go into Laos and Cambodia. It was revealed many years later, but they were very small teams working with those indigenous forces that were looking along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to try to stop the flow of Viet Cong and supplies in there, but never a large effort to go in there and do that. The president continues to bomb North Vietnamese targets, primarily the main city of Hanoi. But again, the bombing campaign in Vietnam was not successful. Nothing like you would see in World War II, where we were hitting infrastructure targets of the Germans, really impacting their ability to fight this war. We never had that type of effect on the North Vietnamese. As the war drags on longer, very similar to what happened to the French, the U.S. public support for this war starts to wear away. And a lot of that is contributed to because the president and General Westmoreland are saying we're winning. But the American people can watch this every night on the news. It's the first war that was called like the living room war. People would sit around after dinner and watch the news every night, and they would see what was happening in Vietnam. It was different than what the president was telling them in his updates. And General Zapp is evolving, right? He's seeking to defeat the U.S. forces and the South Vietnamese forces with a massive offensive. And this is really when we get to the last evolution of low intensity conflict or guerrilla warfare, when he can mass his forces in a single battle, force on force against the Americans, and seeks to fight them when he's ready. He starts this with the siege of Khe Sanh, which is an air base that General Westmoreland is using to monitor and try to influence movement along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And as the North Vietnamese units surround Khe Sanh, his objective is to draw forces from other areas in Vietnam. And Westmoreland plays right into this. He decides that Khe Sanh is the single battle. It's the tipping point, if you will, for the war in Vietnam. And if he can defeat General Zapp at Khe Sanh, then he can defeat the North Vietnamese army and potentially end this war. So he does. He contributes a lot of forces up there, plays right into General Zapp's hands, and they're outnumbered still 6-1. And General Zapp occupies the surrounding hillside. You can see the air bases right here outside of the city of Khe Sanh. And all of these hills up here, General Zapp puts artillery guns on. He starts raining down artillery on top of Khe Sanh during the siege and ultimately in this battle. But it was all a feint, because by the time the battle really begins, the majority of the forces had already moved off of from that siege location and moving toward targets that they were going to attack in the south. And that attack is the Tet Offensive. Honestly, it plays out classically. Here's General Zapp's objectives: attack Khe Sanh, draw U.S. forces out. Thankfully, I think for U.S. forces, that there was a subordinate general to General Westmoreland who convinced him to leave some of his forces or pull some of his forces back and protect the capital city of Saigon. So that's what he does. So there is some forces still remaining to protect, I think, key infrastructure in the south. But the majority of Westmoreland's main effort was focused on Khe Sanh. He falls for that dilemma that General Zapp provides him. And ultimately, he's going to allow the remainder of his forces to infiltrate and to attack during the Tet Offensive. His minimum objective, outcome is stop the U.S. bombing of North Vietnam. That's what General Zapp wants to do, and give them some relief. I think as a maximum, if he can defeat them or show that the U.S. Army is not is fallible, then maybe the U.S. Popular support will erode and they'll pull forces out of Vietnam. So there's what they attack: 36 of 44 key provincial cities and the old imperial city, the capital of Hue. Is psychologically significant, because if they can take and hold a historical capital, well, then maybe the South will realize that they cannot be defeated. This map just shows how the Ho Chi Minh Trail runs outside of interdiction areas that we're working in, outside of North Vietnam, in Laos and Cambodia, and then has injection routes into the South to bring supplies and fighters. Massive attack early in the morning in Saigon, extensive combat. Urban warfare, primarily in the city of Hue, where it was more organized, and we had to have a house-to-house, street-to-street campaign set to eliminate the enemy from that city. Similar in Saigon, where they enter the U.S. Embassy grounds. They never get inside the Chancery building itself, so everybody from the inside was safe. But the television doesn't really report that. The television reporters there show that, hey, there's a major attack going on. The Viet Cong are inside the city. They've made it in the U.S. Embassy. And even though they don't get inside the embassy, traditionally an embassy has a secure building where everything is done. And then outside are also secure grounds that are patrolled by Marines and MPs. And that was the case here. And we did take casualties on the embassy grounds, but they never make it inside the city. But that's not what the American people heard. This continues to erode the support for the war and support for the president in Vietnam. Ultimately, extensive combat is ended by March, and the Viet Cong have been defeated. But defeat is relative, because we're playing a numbers game and they're playing now a psychological warfare and a time game. This showed, at least to the American people, that we were reachable, that the U.S. forces could be attacked on our own territory, and that the North had carried out a massive assault that we did not expect. President realizes we can't win this war, and he wants to start to negotiate peace with the North. Here's just a representative of some of our losses during Tet. But he doesn't negotiate peace. What does he do? He uses the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, asks for more troops to continue to fight. If he pours more troops into the war, maybe then he can win it and get out of there. But again, it's a quagmire. The public has lost confidence in the commander, General Westmoreland, who's ultimately promoted out of a position. He's brought back to Washington, D.C., and given another position in the military. But that credibility gap between the military and what we're saying and the president and what he's saying to the American public continues to widen, and we continue to lose support for the war in Vietnam.